Xaro Daxos makes his series debut in A Clash of Kings. He's one of the three dragon-seeking wise men from Qarth who visit Daenerys and Baes Teloro. He introduces himself as Xaro Daxos of the 13, a merchant prince of Qarth. Once inside Qarth, Xaro offers Dany and her Khalasar hospitality in his palace, where they'd stay for the duration of their time in Qarth. Now, Xaro wasn't hosting Dany out of the goodness of his heart. Rather, the hospitality was the result of Xaro's dragon lust. Quaithe, another of the three wise men, warns Daenerys about this after Dany accepts Xaro's offer. "Beware," the woman in the red lacquer mask said. "Of whom?" "Of all. They shall come day and night to see the wonder that has been born again into the world, and when they see, they shall lust, for dragons are fire made flesh, and fire is power." Recall that I said that Xaro is a member of the 13. The 13 are a prestigious group of merchant princes within Qarth who vie for control of the city with three other prominent groups: the Tourmaline Brotherhood, the Ancient Guild of Spicers, and the Pureborn. Xaro's interest in the dragons is fairly obvious. Dragons are fire made flesh, and fire is power. If Xaro gained custody of the dragons, the 13, and ostensibly Xaro himself, would have immense power and dominion over Qarth until the end of days. Offering up his palace was simply the first of several moves to portray himself as Dany's ally, put himself closer to the dragons, while he secretly waits to stab her in the back. Literally. It's my belief that Xaro wanted Daenerys dead from the instant he saw her and acted as his own hitman in at least one of the attempts on her life. Not to mention, he might have also financed another. Why do I think he did this? Well, for starters, Xaro has motive. As I previously stated, Dany gives him dragons, and dragons give him Qarth. Xaro would also go on to tell Dany to her face that he wanted her dead. In A Dance with Dragons, Xaro visits Daenerys and Meereen, and in an effort to restore the slave trade, offers Dany ships to take her to Westeros. Dany declines his offer, to which Xaro responds, "When I went to the Hall of 1,000 Thrones to beg the Pureborn for your life, I said you were no more than a child. But Aegon Emeros the Exquisite Rose said, 'She is a foolish child, mad and heedless and too dangerous to live.' When your dragons were small, they were a wonder. Grown, they are death and devastation, a flaming sword above the world." He wept away tears. "I should have slain you in Qarth." So per his own attestation, killing Daenerys was on his mind way back then. Are we to believe he never therefore made an attempt on her life? After the aforementioned threat, Dany tells him never to threaten her again, and he tells Dany, Xaro Daxos does not threaten, he promises. This demonstrates that when Xaro wants someone dead, he acts on the desire as opposed to daydreaming about it. For this reason, and because of his motive, I can't believe Xaro never attempted to murder Dany while she resided under his roof. But enough of my editorializing. Let's move on to the assassination attempt. After settling into Xaro's palace, Daenerys goes before the Pureborn to plead for their fleet and their soldiers, both of which she needs to return to Westeros. The Pureborn refuse her request, and while we don't directly witness Dany's audience with them, she recounts it to Xaro afterwards in addition to replaying the events in her mind. The following excerpts from A Clash of Kings show her talk with Xaro and the internal dialogue about her visit with the Pureborn. The drapes kept out the dust and heat of the streets, but they could not keep out the disappointment. Dany climbed inside warily, glad for the refuge from the sea of Qartheen eyes. "Make way," Drogo shouted at the crowd from horseback, snapping his whip. Make way for the mother of dragons." Reclining on cool satin cushions, Xaro Daxos poured ruby-red wine into matched goblets of jade and gold. His hands were sure and steady despite the sway of the palanquin. "I see a deep sadness written upon your face, my light of love." He offered her a goblet. Could it be the sadness of a lost dream? A dream delayed, no more. Danny's tight silver collar was chafing against her throat. She unfastened it and flung it aside. The collar was set with an enchanted amethyst that Xaro swore would ward her against all poisons. The pureborn were notorious for offering poisoned wine to those they thought dangerous, but they had not given Danny so much as a cup of water. They never saw me for a queen, she thought bitterly. I was only an afternoon's amusement, a horse girl with a curious pet. Just as Xaro intended you to be, Daenerys. So smart, that dragon queen. There's a lot to unpack here. Where do I begin? Let's start with the first hint that something is amiss. Red flag number 1. Xaro doesn't drink the wine. We see him pour himself a glass, but at no point does he take a sip. To this point, Danny hadn't either, so it may not seem like a big deal. It just strikes me as odd that he wouldn't have a drink as he waited for Danny to answer the question. Red flag number 2. The information about the pureborn. According to Xaro, they're infamous for giving poison wine to those they deem dangerous. Danny believes it because she has no way to know it's false. But this information isn't corroborated anywhere else in the text. And, in fact, Danny's experience with the pureborn contradicts Xaro's claim because they don't even give her a glass of water. But do you know who is offering Danny wine? Xaro. Is it possible that giving poisoned wine is a custom of his guild, the 13, and not the pureborn, and that's why Xaro hasn't drank from his goblet? If this is true, why lie? That answer is with red flag number 3, the collar. He needed Danny to wear that collar when she stood before the pureborn. The collar wasn't enchanted to protect her from poisons. It was enchanted to alter her appearance. It was a glamour. What was it Daenerys said about the pureborn? Oh yeah, that they never saw her for a queen, only a horse girl with a curious pet. On Xaro's word, Danny dressed in traditional female Qartheen wardrobe because, according to him, the pureborn would never listen to a Dothraki. So in truth, she went before them every inch the queen, wearing a flowing green samite bearing one breast, silvered sandals, and a dragon on her shoulder. But because of the glamour, the pureborn never saw that. Xaro tricked her into wearing a glamour that made her look like the one thing the pureborn wouldn't listen to, a Dothraki, by telling her that collar would ward off poisons, which supposedly they'd give her in her wine, but as we've just talked about, that's looking more like a slanderous lie designed to make the competition look bad. It was crucial that the pureborn refuse Danny because it further isolates her, making her entirely dependent on Xaro. So her intuition was spot on. The pureborn saw her just as Xaro wanted them to. The other interesting thing about the choker is Danny notes that it chafed her throat, compelling her to remove it and then throw it aside. Again, on its own, that behavior isn't odd. If it was tight around her neck, that could happen. But look how Mance Rayder describes his glamour. I feel it when I sleep, warm against my skin, even through the iron. But sometimes in my dreams it starts to burn and your lips turn into teeth. So we can see that a glamour can make the person wearing it feel adverse sensations. Perhaps that's what causes the chafing Danny describes feeling. Now, this isn't undisputable proof that she was unknowingly glamoured, but considering that possibility explains what happened with the pureborn, and Xaro tricking her into it is consistent with the warnings about him being untrustworthy. Keeping this potential ruse in mind, let's move on to the rest of her account of the meeting. Rhaegal hissed and dug sharp black claws into her bare shoulder as Dany stretched out a hand for wine. Wincing, she shifted him to her other shoulder, where he could claw her gown instead of her skin. She was garbed after the Qartheen fashion. Xaro had warned her that the enthroned would never listen to a Dothraki, so she had taken care to go before them in flowing green samite with one breast bared, silvered sandals on her feet, with a belt of black and white pearls about her waist. For all the help they offered, I could have gone naked. Perhaps I should have. She drank deep. The pureborn heard her pleas from the great wooden seats of their ancestors, yet the men who sat in them seemed so listless and world-weary that they might have been asleep. They listened, but they did not hear, or care, she thought. You don't say, Daenerys. Could that be because you appeared before them as the one type of person they'd never listen to? The idea that Dany was secretly glamoured is starting to seem more likely. Just so, let's discuss the next red flag. Rhaegal hissed. The dragons hiss often, but Rhaegal only does it here when Dany reaches for the wine, almost like he's attempting to warn her, but she dismisses it. Even though the poison was odorless to Dany, it wouldn't have been to a dragon. Unfortunately, despite Rhaegal's best effort, Dany drank anyway, and drank deep at that, which leads into red flag number 5. Xaro still hasn't drank any wine, which is pretty odd because he's had the time and Dany's taken her first few sips. So what gives? I'll tell you what gives. That wine is poisoned and Xaro knows it, as does Rhaegal. He, meaning Xaro, probably has no antidote handy, so he can't drink it. Instead, he pours freely and asks Dany open-ended questions to distract her from how much she's drinking, and the fact that he isn't. Let's continue, though. Tell me the words of the pureborn, prompted Xaro Xhoan Daxos. Tell me what they said to sadden the queen of my heart. They said no. The wine tasted of pomegranates and hot summer days. They said it with great courtesy, to be sure, but under all the lovely words, it was still no. Did you flatter them? Shamelessly. Did you weep? The blood of the dragon does not weep. The men we bought, what did they say? Dany explains how they all told her no, then Xaro responds, Alas, the Qartheen should be so faithless. Weep, weep for the treachery of men. Dany would sooner have wept for her gold, the bribes she'd tendered to Mathos Malarawan when Dello Qartheen and Aegon Emeros the Exquisite might have bought her a ship or hired a score of sellswords. This is almost comical. Xaro got Dany to spend nearly all her money on bribes he knew wouldn't work because he'd be sabotaging her meeting with the pureborn later. This serves to trap her in Qarth and make her all the more dependent on him, which is a very little-finger thing to do, might I add. It also buys Xaro more time to plot to steal the dragons and or kill Dany. Talk about scam artist. In any case, as their palanquin ride goes on, we get a lot of internal dialogue from Dany about how she had gotten money by running an unofficial zoo for the dragons, and we also see her gain insight into why Viserys was so bitter and eventually driven mad. That's meaningful to her character development, but of no consequence to this video. Things pick up again when she takes another sip of her wine. Here's that excerpt. As Dany lifted her goblet to drink, Rhaegal sniffed at the wine and drew his head back, hissing. Your dragon has a good nose. Xaro wiped his lips. The wine is ordinary. It is said that across the Jade Sea they make a golden vintage so fine that one sip makes all other wines taste like vinegar. I consider this to be the greatest indication that the wine is poisoned, and Xaro's cheeky comment only validates Rhaegal's detection. Dragons aren't wine connoisseurs. They can't tell a good vintage from a bad by smell, but they can smell poisons, I would assume, and sense threats to their mother. I see no other reason for Rhaegal's behavior and Xaro's response to it than that the wine was laced with poison, and Xaro was amused that the dragon knows what he's doing. I also suspect Xaro gets off on indirectly confessing to Dany's face while she's oblivious to what he really means. If Rhaegal's reaction to directly smelling the wine and Xaro's subliminal confession aren't enough for you to believe that it's poisoned, consider that Xaro still hasn't drank the wine. Dany observes Xaro wipe his mouth, but doesn't say he sipped his wine first. For all we know, Xaro could have rubbed an itch or wiped a spit bubble. The fact is, we get no account of Xaro drinking from his goblet, so it most likely didn't happen, which would make sense because Xaro knows the wine is poisoned. And I don't think him taking a sip would have escaped Dany's notice because remember, they're inside a palanquin, so that's a very enclosed space. He's directly in front of her, so she'd have a bird's eye view of everything that's going on. All of this further convinces me that it's not the pureborn who give their rivals poisoned wine, it's the 13, and that was just another element of Xaro's scam. To be sure, the poison given to Dany would have to be a slow-acting one, because if she died in Xaro's palanquin after drinking Xaro's wine, everyone would know he did it. She'd have to die elsewhere after doing enough separate activities to give Xaro plausible deniability, and who knows, maybe Xaro could work it that he'd frame another political rival for Dany's murder. That she was given a slow-acting poison seems accurate because she's unaffected for the duration of the palanquin ride. You might wonder why then did the poison not affect her that night or the next day? How was it that Dany survived? Let's go back to the palanquin ride. We left off with Rhaegal hissing after directly smelling the wine. The ride continues with Xaro and Dany discussing their alliance, Dany's quest for vengeance, and her forming alliances with the other Qartheen guilds. The palanquin comes to a halt after coming upon a solid wall of people blocking its path. The people had gathered to watch a fire mage perform in the street. Dany wants to watch, so her blood rider Xhago lifts her from the palanquin's window onto his horse so that Dany can see over the crowd. As she watches the mage, Quaithe appears in the crowd not far from them. Here's that excerpt. "A fine trick," announced Xhago with admiration. "No trick," a woman said in the common tongue. Dany had not noticed Quaithe in the crowd, yet there she stood, eyes wet and shiny behind the implacable red lacquer mask. "What mean you, my lady?" "Half a year gone, that man could scarcely wake fire from dragon glass. He had some small skill with powders and wildfire, but he could no more aspire to climb the fiery ladder than a common fisherman could hope to catch a kraken in his nets." Dany looked uneasily at where the ladder had stood. "And now?" "And now his powers grow, Khaleesi, and you are the cause of it." "Me? How could that be?" The woman stepped closer and laid 2 fingers on Dany's wrist. "You are the mother of dragons, are you not?" "She is, and no spawn of shadows may touch her." Xhago brushed Quaithe's fingers away with the handle of his whip. The woman took a step backwards. "You must leave this city soon, Daenerys Targaryen, or you will never be permitted to leave it at all." Dany's wrist still tingled where Quaithe had touched her. Now, many believe that by touching Dany, Quaithe formed a mystic connection to her, and the tingling feeling is residual magic. Perhaps she did. Later down the line, it's implied that Quaithe communicates with Dany via a glass candle, And it's unclear if physical contact is required to do that. I really don't think it is, because other people have been able to use them and see things or other people that they have not touched. Perhaps the whole process works better if you have physically touched the person you're searching for. I don't know. We don't know a whole lot about glass candles. All the same, I'd like to propose another solution here. What if Quaithe secretly gave Danny an antidote to Xaro's poison? What if, between her two fingers, she held a little pin or needle coated with antidote, and Quaithe gave Danny a little prick, and the prick is what caused the tingling? There's a lot of veins in the wrist. Poking her there would get the antidote directly into the bloodstream. Oh, and what was it Quaithe told Danny? You must leave the city soon, or you will never be permitted to leave it at all. Never be permitted to leave it at all. Might Quaithe mean that Danny won't be permitted to leave Qarth because she'll be dead? Obviously referencing that Xaro is trying to kill her, which Quaithe is aware of, having just saved Danny. I, for one, think that's quite possible. And I hate to keep saying if this isn't enough for you, if you don't believe me now, but something that fuels my fire even further to believe that Xaro is poisoning her is after Quaithe touches Danny, she just kind of disappears into the crowd and Danny doesn't see her again. And then Xaro takes Danny back to the palanquin. And it's really creepy. Danny notes how Xaro was watching her the whole time through the palanquin window, and as soon as she gets back in, he immediately forces more wine on her. It's just creepy. And so I think that he, meaning Xaro, I think he speculated that Quaithe might have snuck Danny an antidote, and that's why he gave her more wine, but obviously the antidote counteracted any sort of poison that would have been in it. Oh, and one more thing about that. Wouldn't you know, after forcing more wine on Danny after this interaction, Xaro still does not drink it. So I don't really know what else George is hinting at here other than Xaro's trying to kill her. Now, where it gets even more intriguing is when you consider who Quaithe would be in this situation. That her motive to save Daenerys is, shall we say, personal, and that because of who she is, she'd be well versed in poisons and their antidotes. But that's a video for another time. Let me know what you think of this video. Did Xaro poison Danny's wine? Did Quaithe secretly save her life? She had to have survived the poison somehow, or is it all just a load of malarkey? Leave a comment letting me know your thoughts, and like and subscribe for more content. I'm Ashley of Noth. Thanks for watching.